Oh. I think it is from those are all those are patterns. That matters.
Which is like the work our eyes. Also, there is something about right now. Those obsessed workshop agenda and then I link up and down. And also, for the it's gonna be 1 hour of the not a one way. So whenever you have and then the process. So the seat actually personally, this is my honor to introduce Dr. Stiggins as a keynote speaker today. He's coming on stage. Around the world. He invited us to here today, but luckily, we have this talk. So we invited him today.
I'm not hearing what's going on.
You can't hear us?
I cannot hear you. No, I can't hear what's going on.
Well, can you hear me, Rick?
I can, yes.
Okay, you could hear now soon.
I cannot hear her. I can't hear her.
Okay, so step out in front now, Sue.
Don't use it, Mike.
Here you go. Could be.
Yeah.
Can you hear now, Sue, now, Rick?
Speak.
Yeah, and then I introduced your journey and your story, so I think you didn't miss anything. But we invited him to June in today to talk with us about how to use assessment feedback to promote student learning success. I think this is what your question about when to use, how to use, and so I hope his talk kind of little bit opening our question and then how we are going to move forward the next step. So Link, that is your time.
I'm on.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Hey, it's good to be kind of home there. Just a second. I have to start off with this. I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint for just a second. Okay, so go green. I know there's a big football game this weekend, Spartans and Wolverines, and I'll be watching from out here in Oregon. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm tuned in to what's going on around the campus and stuff as much as I can be. Anyway, it's nice to be with you. I've been really excited about this because for a couple of reasons. One is it gives me a chance to meet you and to talk with you. I've also just finished a manuscript for a new book entitled "Giving Students the Gift of Confidence," and it has a lot of stuff in there on feedback. And I've been invited to write a foreword for a book that Tom Gusky and friends are writing on feedback. And so this is right in the middle of my world to have a chance to talk with you about feedback. I have seen the program. I have a copy of the program here, and it looks like a very impressive. I wish I could have been there to be part of it and to make sure that I was fitting into the flow of things that are going on. I will try to do that anyway. I know that you're going to be. I'm really excited about how much time you're spending on thinking about the achievement standards. Often, I've spent my career doing workshops on classroom assessment, and often people are startled about how much time I want to spend on learning targets before I ever talk about anything related to assessment, because it's foundational. And you're doing that, and you're going to be talking about developing performance assessment tasks and scoring rubrics, and it looks like just a wonderful program. What I want to do with you in the short time that we have together today, I think back to high school speech class where 5 minutes was an eternity. And now, if I have an hour, I don't have enough. It's just not enough time to do much of anything. I wish I had more time with you. So what I'm going to do is take an approach that is orient you to the ideas that I want to share with you about feedback in general and sometimes more specific terms, and then suggest to you ways you can follow up on these ideas and delve into them more deeply if you wish. Incidentally, I do know that our session this morning is being recorded. I'm going to cover a range of material, and I want you to know you don't have to write fast to take notes on it or in your computer or whatever, because you can have a copy of the program. And I sent my PowerPoint program to NMSU too, and you can have the PowerPoint slides if you want. They're all going into your hands if you find them to be of value. So I do want you to know that that I'm going to I'm going to share with you the best of my thinking. And then now, as we go, if something comes up that you find is unclear or need clarification on, just let NMSU know or Joe know, and we'll stop and clarify. And then we will have time at the end of my presentation also to follow up and ask questions and talk with each other about the ideas that I'm going to share with you. I want you for just a while here to put aside your science content. Put aside the matter of assessment per se, although I'll say something about that, and center for the next hour on students. Feedback is teaching and learning. The learning is being done by students. What we need to be centering on for the next hour is what's happening for them in the feedback context. And so for just a little while, let's center on the learners. I'm going to go to my PowerPoint program now and outline a little bit about what I want to do. Besides go green. The title of the presentation is Effective Feedback Helps Students Learn and Gain Confidence. My point here is that there are both cognitive and affective components to effective feedback. And you'll see that play out in some specific detail as we go. To begin with, then, by way of orientation, I want to just be sure we're all kind of on the same page. As I go, I'm going to be defining assessment as the process of gathering information about student achievement to inform educational decisions. And the decisions part is just critical. Feedback delivers the assessment results. It's effective when and only when the quality of the information being shared accurately depicts student achievement. And this turns on a big deal topic, the quality of the assessment that yields that information. Quality is critical. You're going to be spending a lot of time talking about performance assessment methodology. I want to be sure you understand that this is a highly refined methodology. Golly, when I began my career after MSU back in the 1970s, for heaven's sake, one of the first positions I held was director of the Center for Performance Assessment at the Northwest Regional Education Lab. We were beginning to refine our understanding of performance assessment methodology 30 or 40 years ago. It is a highly refined measurement methodology, and it's important, therefore, that you understand the standards of quality that go into the gathering of the information. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today because my topic is about feedback. I just want to be sure that you understand that I'll show you where you can double check matters of assessment quality when it comes to performance assessment. Secondly, it's effective when the feedback is clear and students understand the information that is provided. If there's no understanding, there's no impact. And finally, it's effective when the student is willing and able to act on those results. Willing is the affective part, and we're going to talk about that quite a bit, and then how to set them up to be able. So that's how I'm going to be thinking about feedback, just by way of initial orientation. And I want to then also here at the beginning highlight what's going to be my key point for the morning, for the day. It's afternoon there, right? Sorry. The work required to make feedback productive for students begins long before any assessment takes place. There's foundational work that needs to be done to set them up so the feedback is productive for them. And this is going to be a big deal part of my presentation during our time together. So now, let me go back to the assessment definition. Assessment is the process of gathering information to inform educational decisions. In any particular assessment context, we're going to talk about different contexts. The key to success in a feedback sense is to know what decisions need to be made in that context, who's making them, and therefore what information they need. The assessment needs to provide that information. Feedback needs to deliver it. If we don't have answers to these questions in any particular context, then having effective feedback is beyond reach. Feedback must deliver that information in a timely and an understandable way. The key here is the decision and what it requires. And we've got to be specifically informed about that. Now, it turns out that the schooling process includes quite a few decision makers. And I want to just describe some of them now because I want to step back from the small picture of feedback and create a bigger picture of what we need to accomplish here. There are users of assessment information who make decisions in the classroom, obviously on a day-to-day basis. And those decision makers are students, teachers, and sometimes parents. So they need information to inform their decisions. In addition, in the schooling process, it has become currently popular to rely on interim benchmark assessments to inform professional learning communities and program managers. This is more at the across classrooms perspective of information about student achievement, because decisions need to be made at program levels or across classrooms. And thirdly, there are users of annual standardized tests, school leaders and policymakers. Of these three, which one do you think arises from the strongest foundation of having a potential impact on student learning success? There is no question that 30 years of international research puts the spotlight on the classroom level of assessment. Yet, where have we spent all of our assessment resources for the last 40 years? But I digress. I don't want to go into that. What I want to do is call attention to the classroom level of assessment. In addition, at those levels, there are different reasons why we assess. There are formative applications of assessment. You all know about this. It's currently a popular topic, using assessment to support student learning. I'm going to identify in the course of my presentation today a second formative application that I'm separating out for reasons that will become clear. I'm going to call it assessment for learning. And then, of course, there are summative uses of assessment. Once again, I'm going to point out that 30 years of international research on the impact of assessment on student achievement puts the spotlight on the first two. Formative assessment supports student learning in order to inform teachers so that y'all can plan instruction to meet student current needs. This is all familiar to you, and it's critically important. Feedback is crucial in this context. Assessment for learning is another formative application that wants to support student learning success, but this time to inform students so they can make decisions leading them to their own success, so they can remain confident that success is within reach for them. Assessment for learning is for students and their information needs. And then, of course, there are summative assessments, the purpose of which is to judge the sufficiency of student learning at a point in time for reasons that we know: report achievement status in grades or in report cards, or in the form of test scores that school leaders use to set program priorities. Now, here's what I've done in order to establish the context and the importance of feedback in my work at our Assessment Training Institute in Portland. What I've created is what I call a balanced assessment system that wants to meet the information needs of all of those assessment users for those various purposes. And what that looks like is the chart. And I provided to Namsu a printed version of this chart. And I want to refer to that now for just a few minutes. The user categories are there. Users are classroom level users, students, teachers, parents, interim benchmark users, and annual users, crossed in this chart with formative, assessment for learning, and summative reasons for assessment. And what results here is 9 cells of a table, each of which you will see if you look at it, identifies who the key decision maker or makers are, what key decisions they need to make, and what information they need. Teachers need to know, from a feedback point of view, what comes next in my student learning so I can plan instruction to meet those needs. look particularly at the assessment for learning cell at the classroom level, where students work with their teachers to make sure that students know what comes next in my learning. And what's required here is student-friendly learning targets and learning progressions with evidence of where each student is currently in their progressions. Do you see that this must be a primary focus for feedback to students? Because it is what determines what they do in response to that feedback to continue their progression. And then, of course, there is the summative column, and I don't want to spend a lot of time about that. It's all very familiar, grades and grading. What I want to center on here as we continue is the formative and primarily the assessment for learning columns, because it's there that we can take maximum advantage of feedback to support student learning success. When you get a few minutes, do take a more extensive look at the table so that you can see what happens in each cells. What's really critical here is to understand that each cell makes a unique contribution to student learning success that the other cells can't make. This is why I'm an advocate of balanced assessment systems, because there are lots of really important decision makers, and they need important information, read feedback, in order to do their jobs. But the thing is, as we think about what we've been doing from an assessment point of view over the decades, when we have the maximum power at the upper, in terms of impacting student learning at the upper left-hand corner of the column, we've spent virtually all of our assessment resources at the lower right-hand column, a part of the cells in the table. I keep saying this and I keep backing off from it. This makes no sense because the productive feedback doesn't come from there. It comes from the upper cells. So as you refer to this now, what I want to do as we continue to talk about feedback is I want to center on primarily on the assessment for learning column and refer continuously then to the formative assessment column at the classroom level. Here's what's happened to me over the course of my career. As I have studied classroom assessment processes with a powerful microscope for a long period of time, perhaps the most important insight that has come to me in the course of my work is the realization that students are probably the primary players in the classroom assessment process. It's not that there aren't important players, but the thing is, what I've come to understand is what students think about and do with assessment results is at least as important as what we adults think about and do with those results. We have this way of thinking about assessment as something adults do to students. That's not wrong, it's insufficient. So out of this, we draw the conclusion that it's crucial that students understand their results, and that's feedback. And what I want to talk about is how we go about doing that. Here's another variation on that same theme. And this is something we should have gotten a long time ago. And I don't know why we didn't, but it's become critical for me in my work. A student's emotional reaction to her or his feedback goes a long ways toward determining what that student will do about it. It's feedback as the trigger for something. Making it productive means we need to trigger it so that students' emotional and cognitive response is productive. We need to have brought them to a place where upon seeing that feedback, they can say to themselves, I get it. I understand this feedback. And I know what to do about it. I've got this. Now, the last bullet is just critical. And this is the result of productive feedback. I'm determined to keep going. I'm going to keep learning. I've got this. Feedback. We must bring students to a place where they can say this based on the feedback that they receive. That's what makes it productive. Because the counterproductive response leaves them saying, I have no idea where I am in my learning progressions. I have no idea what to do next. I'm no good at this stuff anyway, I quit. Do you see how if the feedback brings them where they're to the place where they're saying these things, there's no way it's productive? The question is, how do we get them to a place where they can say these things? The positive things, the productive things, where we avoid the counterproductive or hopeless response. I go back once again to what I said before. I'm repeating it. What students think about and do with assessment results, read feedback, is at least as important as what we adults think about and do with those results. Because they're going to decide whether to try or not. Do you see how it is the case that they're making their decisions first? You know, if upon receiving the feedback, they give up. It doesn't matter what we're doing with our highfalutin data management systems. The learning already stopped. And we weren't even a player. And this is how critical it is for feedback, however we deliver it, to be productive. I want to delve into this a little bit more deeply for just a second. There's a psychological construct that has been developed over the years, written articulately about by Albert Bandura, who's a professor at Stanford. He first wrote about this in the early 1990s, called self-efficacy. And it's a continuum. And if you'll allow me, I want to go into this in a little bit of depth, because my point is that feedback must be delivered, prepared and delivered in a way that maximizes a student's sense of control over their own academic well-being or their self-efficacy. Let me define the continuum for you, and apologize, I'm going to read to you for just a minute. I'm blocked on the screen a little bit, but that's okay, I can read most of it. Here's one end of the continuum of something called efficacy, self-efficacy. A strong sense of efficacy enhances human accomplishment and personal well-being in many ways. People with a high assurance in their capabilities approach difficult tasks as challenges to be mastered rather than problems to be avoided. Such an efficacious outlook fosters intrinsic interest and deep engrossment in activities. These people set for themselves challenging goals and maintain a strong commitment to them. They heighten and sustain their efforts in the face of failure. They quickly recover their sense of efficacy in the face of failures or setbacks. Now, I've highlighted this next sentence in red. They attribute failure to insufficient effort or deficient knowledge or skills that they believe are acquirable. They just didn't get them. They approach threatening situations with the assurance that they can exercise control over them. Such an efficacious outlook produces personal accomplishment, reduces stress, and lowers vulnerability. I submit to you that it's not possible for students in the domain of science to master the kind of standards that we're talking about these days, unless they're at this end of the continuum. This is where we want them to be. This is where they need to be, because the other end of the continuum is this one. In contrast, people who doubt their capabilities shy away from difficult tasks, which they view as personal threats. They have low aspirations and a weak commitment to the goals they choose to pursue. When faced with difficult tasks, they're tending to do things like dwell on their personal deficiencies or the obstacles that'll keep getting there are all kinds of adverse outcomes, rather than concentrating on how to be successful. They slacken their efforts and give up quickly in the face of difficulties. They're slow to recover their sense of efficacy following failures or setbacks. And again, I highlight in red, because they view performance as deficient aptitude, it doesn't require much failure for them to lose faith in their capabilities. And if they're facing the kinds of achievement standards that you're talking about during the conference from this point of view, their chances of success are minimal. And so what I'm saying to you is, and this may surprise you, I hope it makes sense to you, is that feedback, a key role for feedback in the classroom assessment process is to help students believe in themselves and make decisions that lead to productive learning. Is this making sense to you? Let me just stop for a second, because I'm going to talk with you about how we go about constructing feedback that does this. Is there any reaction to this that you need to share? Are you okay with what I'm saying to you? The emotional dynamic side of this is something that I have come to realize in the course of my career is absolutely essential. Because if students give up in hopelessness in the face of the standards that you're holding them to, they're doomed to failure. They've got to find success in order to be confident. Are you okay with that? Nod or something. Nod or wave your hands or something.
Good.
You okay? All right, good. So far. All right. So let me go on. So then the question is, hang on. Go green. I gotta get back. I gotta get back to where I was now. Like, come on. How do we do that? Oh, I got it. Can we help our students believe in themselves? The other version of this question when I was putting the presentation goes, how can we help students? The question is, can we? And the answer is we absolutely can. And it's by applying principles of assessment for learning. Now, this is, once again, a highly developed assessment methodology that has been the focus of research and development for at least the last 20 years around the world. When I first created my assessment training institute in 1992 in Portland, we called it student-centered classroom assessment, and it was about bringing students into the assessment process as partners while they're learning, and I called it student-centered. And because it made sense to me to involve them, I found some teachers who were doing this, and they convinced me that it's a really powerful teaching strategy. Well, and then I was informed of a research of synthesis on this kind of idea that had just been completed, summarizing 20 years of research on the impact of assessment for learning on student learning that revealed unprecedentedly profound achievement score gains, literally around the world, with student involvement in the assessment process and an assessment for learning sense. So not only does it make sense from an emotional dynamics and cognitive learning point of view, But it turns out that it arises from a solid international foundation of research on its efficacy. Assessment for learning is a formative practice that brings students into the process of assessing their own achievement and making some of their own decisions in collaboration with their teachers while they're learning. Hear me on this. When this is what we're doing, the grade book is closed. This is not about summative assessment. In a little while, I'll say something about grades as feedback. But what we're talking about here is it has to be okay in an assessment for learning environment for students not to be good at it yet. To be in the learning process, to be in the growing process. That's the environment that we're talking about. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that a researcher in Australia, Roy Sadler, captured the essence of this set of ideas by telling us, showing us that the basis of this kind of student involvement is that we need to keep students continuously informed of answers to 3 critical questions. The first question is, where am I headed in my learning? The second question is, where am I now in relation to that learning? And the third question is, and I want you to notice the locus of control here. How can I close the gap between those two? Do you see feedback written all over that? Do you see it? Now, what we have developed in our work at the Assessment Training Institute, and what we've built our professional development programs around this concept toward, are what we call 7 strategies of assessment for learning. And they're very specific instructional strategies, and they have been articulated in the form I'm about to share with you by my colleague and longtime professional associate, Jan Shapui. And I'll cite a reference for it before we're done. To help students know where they're going, provide clear, student-friendly statements of intended learning targets from the very outset of the learning. And accompany that, if possible, with examples and models of student work that reveal to students as early as possible what good work looks like when it's done well, what mediocre work looks like, and what poor quality work looks like. What we're trying to communicate to students here is the pathway that they're about to travel. They can't hit the target yet, but that doesn't mean they can't see it and wish for it even. And we can show them illustrations of it. And what's going to happen is those illustrations are going to allow them to watch themselves progressing and feel in control of that progress. The internal locus of control, how can I close the gap, is just critical. To help students know where they are now, there's the big feedback word. Offer them continuous access to descriptive feedback, not judgmental feedback. The difference is critical. That describes their work in ways that allow them to see how to do better the next time. Assessment for learning environments are full of next times. It's okay not to be good at it to begin with. Here's what to do to take a step forward. And in that process, teach students the skills of self-assessment. So what we're trying to do is to help them internalize the vocabulary and meaning of the learning target, so they can watch themselves grow and be partners with their teachers in setting goals for what comes next. You see, what we're doing is we're opening the story up and we're bringing them in as full partners, relying on feedback as the source of information that drives them forward. And then to help them close the gap, design instruction that focuses on key attributes or aspects of successful performance. That may just be one aspect at a time. You get to decide about that. I'm not a master of the science that we're teaching. But what we want to do then is to teach students the skills of focused revision. So if we can show them how what a key attribute looks like, then have them revise their work based on the key attribute. They're stepping forward, not all the way, but part of the way, a critical part of the way. And then engage students in continuous self-reflection, giving them opportunities to track their own achievement, their own growth, and giving them opportunities to talk with each other and maybe with others, with their parents, with their teacher, about their progress. Like, I'm not there yet, but like, here's where I want, you know, where I've seen that idea play out most profoundly is in what I think is the biggest breakthrough to happen in communicating about student achievement in the last 100 years. And that's student-led parent-teacher conferences, where I've watched students move their parents to tears with pride and surprise at what they didn't know their children could do when they're holding forth with their growth portfolio, describing where they were, where they are now, and where they're heading. Parents had no idea they could do that. And they were moved by it. Because what happens is students assume control. And feedback throughout this process is what gives them that sense of control. That's the self-efficacy part. That's where students gain control over their own academic success. And in these times that we're living in, what could be more important than that? Now, I want you to think about these 7 strategies in a slightly different way. And the different way is that I want you to see it as a progression. Because these 7 things build on each other, and it's very clear once you begin to think in these terms as a learning progression for students. From a student, now this is all from the student's point of view. I'm speaking from the student's voice. Knowing where I'm headed gives me a point of reference that will be stable. You know, it's like GPS. That's where I'm going. I don't exactly know where there is. I can see it, but at least I'll have that point of reference as I go, as I travel. And with that in mind, I can begin to understand the feedback that tells me where I am now, not just at one point, but continuously through my progression. Where I am now is changing. And I want to see that, and I want to see those, and I want to see those changes. So I can self-assess and watch myself grow. Developing a vocabulary and understanding that allows me to talk with others about the goal and my progress. Do you see how the progression is taking them inside the learning targets continuously and developing their understanding of the science in your case that's involved, and the reasoning, the science knowledge and the reasoning and the performance skills? We get to understand them, and we learn to talk about them. this helps me stay in control of my own success. And that's the optimism. That line is what I just finished writing a book about. Give students the gift of confidence. The gift of confidence is the gift of control. So I can partner with my teacher in planning what comes next for me as I close the gap and know I'm doing it and get out of my way. That leaves me ready to ask for whatever help I might need. I don't have to wonder, like, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know where to go. This gives me the vocabulary and the understanding. The feedback that I've received gives me what I need to know what comes next for me and where I need help. Another dimension of internal control. And I am in control of my ultimate success. Confident. Can you dig it? This is what I think of when I think about feedback that leaves students feeling in control of their success, effective feedback. So to just summarize what I've said pretty rapidly with my lists, effective feedback directs attention to the learning targets, constantly informing students and us as their teachers about strengths and what kinds of improvement are needed. So we can communicate about those things in our feedback. It's descriptive. It focuses on attributes of students' work, not attributes on students as learners. Just trying harder is not good feedback. It has to say, do this with your work and watch what happens. And it occurs while the learning is happening to support action in the direction of productive learning. It builds on students' partial understanding as they're growing. Do you see how it builds on their growth? If they have no understanding at all about the learning target, no feedback is going to help. The next action is instruction, not feedback. If they have no understanding at all, then we got to teach them something. But once they begin to put that understanding together, and it is partial and growing, then we grow on that. We build on that. It's important to limit the correctives along the way so as to not overwhelm. And we need to leave it to the student to act. Put them in a place where they're ready to act. These are the things that are important about feedback. So my key point at the beginning of the presentation was the work required to make feedback productive begins long before any assessment takes place. It begins back when we share the targets and we begin students on their progression, providing feedback as they go, where we keep them believing in themselves as they're growing. That's a continuous progress kind of thinking about feedback. The thing that has been the foundation of my career for the last 30 or 40 years is this one: engage students in self-assessment while they're learning, because this gives feedback a home where it can exert its positive influence. These are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you this morning, and I did leave time in our time together, in our hour together, for any reactions that you may have. Yeah, so let me open the floor now and ask what your thoughts about this are, what your reactions are, or what I might fill in detail about. as we go. Anything at all?
Well, first of all, Rick, thanks very much. We really appreciate those remarks. And I'm sure we have some. We're going to run around and pass the mic so you can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Do
Okay.
pass the mic if there's interest in talking.
So what questions we have, everybody? Comments, questions? Well, I'll start off, Rick. I really appreciate your focus on learning, right? Using assessments for learning. Often we in school think primarily of assessment tasks to evaluate rather than focus learning. So really providing feedback that can
Right.
really push students to really learn some of the challenging ideas is really critical.
Yeah,
In particular, in the age of at least to work in science classrooms, it's really important because some of these standards we were talking this morning are really challenging for children. Actually, they're challenging for us too, because we weren't in that realm. So supporting students on how to build models across the K-12 spectrum, how to write explanations across the K-12 spectrum, and providing appropriate feedback to students so that they can really learn these challenging practices integrated with this disciplinary ideas, I think is just really, really critical. And one way we can do that is really by, as teachers, providing feedback to kids on their assessment tasks. I guess that was.
and do understand that students can provide each other with feedback too, as they develop the vocabulary and understanding. They can be resources for each other. And that's a wonderful, do you understand that when we're in an assessment for learning environment, a lot of the work associated with assessment kind of gets shifted to students, and it's very productive work because they're monitoring and they're telling us what they need. And it's very efficient. It increases the efficiency of the operation when they're helping each other too. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep,
breaking up in groups and sharing each other, especially with models, because they're so visual that it really is helpful that they look at. So we do have
Right.
One teacher. We have a question.
Yeah.
Can we introduce yourself so Rick will know who you are?
Hi, Rick. I'm Kimmery Abadier. I teach science. Well, I don't actually anymore. I'm retiring, but I own you for a long time. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold the mic right close to your face.
Okay. Okay, we'll try this. Is this better?
No, it's fine. You go ahead. I can hear you.
Okay. I'm just trying to process everything that you said. I feel like that the way that you described it is the way my classroom was. And something happened in the last few years, and it's really difficult with students to get them to give each other feedback in a constructive way. I'm not sure how to go back and teach those skills again. That's where my brain is like, what did I used to do? What did the kids used to have that allowed them to have that conversation? Because they used to give each other feedback on their models. They used to give each other feedback on their explanations. They used to do that. That was my whole classroom. And last year and this year, the students that at least in 7th and 8th grade that we're dealing with, they're struggling with that. And I'm not sure how to go back and support them in that.
Right. Something that Joe said at the beginning of what he just said may be important here. Now, I don't know for sure because I obviously don't know your classroom or your kids, but if it is the case that the achievement standards have become more complex, more difficult to process based on more technical background knowledge that requires more technical vocabulary, they just may not have the wherewithal to give each other feedback. That is, they may not have sufficient science knowledge or vocabulary or scientific reasoning, given the complex standards that have emerged. That would make it difficult for them. They would see themselves, they would see themselves as incapable of doing that because they just don't feel like they know enough to do it. Is that relevant at all here?
I'm not sure because we had those standards before.
Okay.
But I do feel like they missed some of
The building blocks
the building blocks of social interaction and the building blocks of
of written expression, possibly in the past several years throughout COVID, that if we're expecting them to interact with each other and they don't have those social skills very strongly yet, if we're expecting them to write feedback or even write their own writing, those may be the building blocks they're missing, not necessarily the science.
Oh, okay. So the interpersonal skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. That's a very interesting phenomenon because it may be that they're because it may be that they're that the manner in which they're spending their time these days doesn't include those kind of social interaction skills.
Yeah, and I think that's mostly what they're struggling with, and that's why you put them in groups to work, and they're doing anything but what they're supposed to be doing. So
Mhm.
they're not getting what they need to in terms of feedback because they're not going through the steps that they used to be able to go through. So I think you're right, it's a prerequisite. I just don't think it's a science prerequisite.
Right. Okay. All right. No, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Well, I guess the only thing we can do then is give them as much practice as possible and model as much as we possibly can. And maybe think about breaking things down into smaller pieces or something along those lines so that they can communicate and develop that vocabulary and that interpersonal sense. Confidence. Yeah. Okay. What else?
Hi, Rick. I'm James Everling. I'm a finance consultant in Oakland County in Michigan here. Can
Okay.
you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. So, two things. I really appreciate the notion of trying to help kids build confidence through your assessment feedback. I think that was really useful. One other thing that I noticed though is this idea of learning targets. And in the past, I felt like that was a very easy thing to do. And I was able to point my kids to that and we were working toward it, that sort of thing. However, since the NGSS has come about, we've sort of shied away from some of that in that we don't want to reveal too much to the kids. We want them to discover it for themselves. And so by putting those ideas up there, you're sort of guiding them to it. And so I wonder if you could speak to that at all, or if you're familiar enough with the science standards to be able to speak to that.
I'm not familiar enough with the science standards, but I can comment on the idea. Learning is a progression. And if I don't have the prerequisite understanding of vocabulary, then it's difficult for me to make leaps spontaneously. There needs to be a way to map. If what we want them to do is to discover the insight or discover the concept or whatever, there needs to be building blocks to that. It can't happen spontaneously. It can't come out of nowhere. We have to find a way to say, okay, so let's start with this, which is something that you do know and understand. And what if we thought differently about it to get to this? There needs to be some way to some building blocks that get them there. And it's okay if it's building blocks in process where they conduct some kind of little experiment or something that derives the insight. That's fine, but it needs to be. But we can't expect things to appear spontaneously in their thinking. There needs to be a pathway there somehow, in some form. You know, if there are some foundational science concepts that are critical building blocks of the development of mastery of standards. And you know what they are. Why would you keep them from students?
I think that's.
Why
I was
can't you
actually-
give them what the foundations are? Then they build from those. I'm grasping a little bit here to try to understand. Yeah.
I was gonna actually kind of go on that same path with you. My name's Kim. And I was just thinking, you know, part of our inquiry process, we want them to engage and you know, investigate and explore and arrive at these concepts. But we often have a phenomenon that they're exploring. So you could have a more broad target of, when this is finished, you're going to explain to me this phenomenon. And along the way, I would like you to develop a model, explain a model, revise and critique. And so those could be your targets. And even I remember the other day, someone mentioned being able to communicate effectively. So we could have some of those like broader targets. Maybe it's not the specific learning objective or performance task, and we're not giving them, you know, what particle model of light does, but at least they have some things that they can work towards and improve towards.
That's true. That's true. And if there are some starting points for that progression that are crucial for them to experience some success, and that's critical. That is, experiencing some success pretty quickly is important, because that's where confidence comes from. And you can give them some of that starting place so that they understand it and say, go from there. At least they have some promise of early success in that progression. In the Giving Students the Gift of Confidence book, one of the key points I make is that the parent of confidence is success. If all I experience is failure and frustration, confidence is not likely to be forthcoming. And I tell a bunch of stories about how in my early life, my confidence was destroyed because of early failures. The starting place for a progression like that, or any other progression, has to be some early success. If the success is not forthcoming, the progression will stop. If all a student experiences is failure and frustration, they will give up in hopelessness. And that's a dynamic that I think we have to wrap our ideas around. Early success is essential for building from that success. Do whatever you need to do to have them have a success to begin with. Give them something, help them make a connection that they get to give themselves personal credit for, and then go from there into the progression that you just described. But they got to have a start to keep them going. And if they get into a place where they're experiencing chronic failure, the only way out of it is success. They have to experience some success that turns that around, or they're doomed. Success is the parent of confidence. We've got to find ways to get them that success.
So, you know,
What else?
One of the reasons I like, I find value in the framework for K-12 science education. And I also find a lot of value in the next generation of science standards, because it's actually the first set of standards that we have ever had in the United States in science that actually provides a progression K through 12.
Good.
And we can take advantage of that, because we should try to take advantage of that. On the other hand, my heart was broken earlier this morning because one of our participants said, you know, I teach middle school and the kids come into my classroom without any science, right? Then we have to start from that. We have to realize that. We can't start off where the 6th grade standards are. We have to build what they had to learn from K5. And we have to get more science into the K5 classrooms, because that progression is so important. If we want to get kids to those higher levels, it's so critical to get science into the classrooms in K-5 so we could systematically build across the years. And some of the school districts here are actually really trying to do that, putting a real concerted effort into fostering K-5 and then building the middle school and building the high school. So that's very refreshing. On the other hand, I can't remember who said that this morning, but it was really, Catherine said it. My heart was just broken to hear that, right? Because that's the vision of the new framework. Let me stop and see if there's one last question or comment from anybody. Nathan? Yeah. Good. Nathan has a question here for you.
Can you hear me, Rick?
Yeah.
Wonderful. My name is Nathan Spencer. I'm a science ed consultant in Wayne County, Michigan. And so I've been following your work for a long time. And something I noticed today is that I made a lot of connections to the shifts in instruction and thinking around student learning that have been made since the frameworks come out to this work that you have here. The language is different, but all the end goals and purposes are identical. And so when I make connections to storylines, the way we are working to help students explain phenomena over time and making coherent units of instruction. So I make connections to that. I make connections to assessment for learning, when we're having students engage in the work of modeling, engaging in things like, I think Joe mentioned earlier, gallery walks and student feedback. So what I really liked, the connection I made today, what I really liked is seeing the work that we've been doing and been helping teachers with for the past 8 years. That's found within the framework that you've developed. So I made a lot of great connections, so I appreciated it.
Good. I want to add one other thing too. Just a quick, hang on. Go green, yeah. But I also want to let you know that and this will be obviously in the program if you get a copy of it. There are some resources that are available if you want to follow up more on on this or on the topic of performance assessment methodology. There are a couple of books that are available through our assessment training or through the publishers, Pearson and ASCD. Now, incidentally, I need for you to understand that I'm not hawking books for royalties here. Incidentally, it is the case that my royalties over the last 30 years, any royalties that I've received have come to MSU. We've created an endowment there to enhance the quality of pre-service assessment training, do research, support research in that domain. So I'm an MSU supporter that way too. But these are books that are available that can allow you to delve into these ideas more deeply if you wish. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew that they are available. Again, they're listed in the program that you can have a copy of if you want. I am really honored to be invited to come and talk with you. I feel like that I don't bring sufficient science knowledge to address all the issues that you face, but the thing that we can center on is thinking about all of this from the student's point of view, from the student's perspective. At least tune in to their point of view. Grades can be good feedback too, if they link back for the student and the student's thinking to learning targets that they were held accountable for. So they know which ones they mastered and did master, so they know what they need to work on. There are lots of ways to use feedback to support them. And finally, I want to just thank you for all the things that you do for the kids. I love you guys. And I love the work that you do. And I want you to know that I appreciate you more than maybe anybody in the whole wide world. So let's go forth and beat the Wolverines. Oh, unless you're all Wolverines. Oh my God. Anyway, anything else?
Probably have half Wolverines here and half a Spartan, so.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, go blue. Go blue.
Anyways, I really want to take just a minute here and thank you for everybody in the room, because this is like the first time that there's been such a gathering of teachers and teacher leaders in the last 3 years, and to bring us all together to be able to collaborate on a very important topic. So we really want to thank you, because you're the one who allowed this to happen. And so, well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for supporting this event. I can tell you that it will definitely play big dividends in the end run with the teaching and learning that happens in the state of Michigan. So thank you very much, both for the presentation, but also for sponsoring this event. It's really,
Yeah, you bet. We're all on the same team, guys. We're all on the same team. I love you. Thanks.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. See ya. Thanks.
Go green. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.